I have a few bits of advice for younger painters or new painters. I want to talk a little bit about the business of being a painter. The way that my career is set up now is fairly endemic to most painters in galleries. I'm represented by a number of galleries, and it's a 50-50 relationship. Me being responsible for the work and most of the photography, and then the gallery being responsible for the framing, the transportation, the promotion and advertising, and then for maintaining the actual gallery space and exhibitions, etc. And that relationship works well for me and has for a long time. I remember in the old days, when I had to do everything myself, I would photograph little pictures of my paintings, then cut them out, glue them onto these little placards, and then on the back, I would print my short but growing resume. In this case, it's just the information on the painting, and then Top Communications, which was the logo for my studio up until about 15 years ago. And I would send these out to collectors and potential collectors and anyone who I thought might be interested in what I was doing. And I've been in New York City 25 years now, and then as things began to progress and I got into more shows, when I would appear in a group show, for instance, I would write a little press release about my work. I have a little image in it, Xerox hundreds of copies of that, and then go to bookstores all over the island of Manhattan and insert a copy into every single art magazine on the shelves. I'd plaster them in subways and on platforms, and I don't think any of this ever helped, but I love the notion of being out there, pounding the pavement, creating an artistic persona and a body of work, and then trying to package that and then disseminate that out into the world. I know I'm romanticizing here because that was arduous work, but I love that part of it. I love the business part as well as the creative part. And I think that's important to recognize that it is very much a business. And if you want to be a painter for a long, long time, you have to learn how to negotiate yourself in that business, but also how to separate yourself from the creative part. And a buddy of mine says there is one show business and all of us work in it. So if you're a painter, you and I work in show business. And I don't care if you're Chuck Close or Toni Morrison or Johnny Cash or Harry Houdini. It's all one show business and we're all working in it. And I've had the opportunity over many, many years to meet some very well-known painters like de Kooning and like Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns, and I never met Guston. I always wanted to. Joan Mitchell. I remember in the late 80s, a year or two before she died, it was one of her last shows at Robert Miller Gallery. I went down about an hour early hoping to meet her before the crowds got there. And sure enough, I walked in and she was completely alone in silence, just looking at her work. And I walked right up to her and introduced myself, and we had a delightful conversation for about 10 or 12 minutes. And I had been warned about her as being really ornery and prickly, and she could not have been more generous and more kind with me, a total stranger. We talked about chamber music, and we talked about some of her black paintings from the 60s, which I had questions about. And she said something to me to the effect of, figure out what you want to do with your life and then let it kill you. And I've always remembered that quote. And one thing I found in common generally with the finest painters, the best ones, are always the nicest people. Perhaps it's because everything is compressed and condensed into their work. They have nothing to prove outside of their work. And by putting everything into the work, all that's left over is just a kind person. And that's some advice I would give to younger painters, is to just make sure that you're just a kind, gentle person. I consider myself a kind person, and it's partly because of the way my parents raised me, and I think also the fact that I simply love what I do, and I put every single ounce of myself into the work, so that what's left over, I think, is just a fairly well-adjusted, nice person. I think it makes you a better painter to be. Kenneth Clark said that facts become art through love. And I've always admired that notion that everything around us is just information until it's shot through the lens of a human mind, the human imagination, with love, and then it becomes art. That love is the membrane between bending the laws of nature to fit the laws of art. We're taking the laws of nature and forcing them into the laws of art. And the key word there is the bending. And the bending is the part that has to just be redolent with love. Love is the lube that makes it all happen. And in terms of getting one's work out there, the world is so much better now than it was 20-something years ago, even 5 years ago. There are so many ways to get your imagery out there and your ideas and your work on the internet. And you know all the names I'm talking about, Facebook and Twitter and websites and blogs. It's so much easier, so much, and all free now. So there are many, many avenues to pursue and many ways to do this. One practical way to get some names and addresses is every August Art in America publishes the annual guide. And it's a list categorized by state of galleries around the country, the principals who work in the galleries, and then the address and the roster of people they exhibit. So you can kind of get an idea and cross-reference people who may share your same aesthetic, and then that's sometimes a nice way to proceed when it comes time to start presenting your images to people. There are very, very cheap avenues to go in terms of printing now. You can mass produce beautiful cards and foldouts for relatively little money. And all those things I think help. You can never be guaranteed of anything, but at least there are ways to get the imagery out there and get yourself out there. But the most important thing I think is to continue to just be a kind person and love everything. Love learning, love the history of art, love your fellow people, love process, and I think it just makes you a better painter. It was Claude Monet who said that you need three things to be a painter: an iron will, the ability to work like a locomotive, and indifference to everything but the canvas. And I think I've nailed two of the three. I don't think I'm indifferent to everything but the canvas, but I do have an iron will, and I work like a mother. George Santayana said that beauty is the cooperation of pleasures and truth the cooperation of perceptions. And two things that bring me great pleasure are lemon meringue pie and big magnolia blossoms. And whenever I go down south to Myrtle Beach to see my parents, there's always a homemade lemon meringue pie, which is my favorite, waiting for me. And then I go into the backyard and pick a big magnolia blossom and put it into a glass bowl of water right beside the bed where we sleep. I love seduction, and I love being seduced by pleasurable visual experiences. And this certainly plays a role in my love for the decorative. I don't know about you, but I love looking at decorative objects, like this pair of Viennese vases from around 1800. And the way that the image and the object are inseparable. The painting on the vase is the vessel. And the story of the musicians, the image, continues all the way around, evolving eternally, never coming to fruition, but continually evolving. I think is a beautiful idea, and certainly one that I bring to bear in my paintings. I know the word decorative is used pejoratively in the art world today, and I can't stand when artists just dismiss things as merely decorative. And I'm talking about decorative in the way that Matisse would use it. When an artist summons all of their visual acumen to transform an object, to integrate all the parts together to delight the eye and to seduce the eye and to create visual poetry. This is extremely hard to do, and when it's done correctly, and a visual experience can just soar. So it is a very important part of my studies as a painter, the notion of the decorative. From all periods and all cultures, it's extremely hard to do, and life is too short. I think pleasure is an important part of what I do. This is a new painting that I'm working on. It's not finished yet. It's for a show in the fall. It's about 7 feet tall. We rented a house this summer out on Long Island, which sits on a marsh, very similar to the kind of marsh environment I grew up in along the coast of South Carolina. And I've been sitting there, spending a lot of time looking at it, thinking about Martin Johnson Heade, the American Hudson River painter, luminous painter, and his thunderstorm paintings, with that emblematic American sense of landscape, of that firm placement of foreground and then that meandering back into the distance. And you can see that same structure at play in this. There's kind of a serpentine S curving movement into the background. And those curves are very much countered by harder edge areas of paint, which you can see on the sides. I like the notion of curves as representing hyperbole and exaggeration and playfulness and sort of like a meandering conversation with no directive and no destination in mind. It's more of a groping feeling. And I also like the idea of exaggeration in terms of, if you think of Picasso's The Family of Saltimbanques from 1905, the idea of the diamond shape on the jester is simply a square turned on its side. It becomes, it's something rigid and static. When it's turned on its side, it becomes a diamond, which is playful and in motion and somewhat exaggerated. And that's what I think about when I do these curves and these movements in the back as well. I want to look at a couple of areas of paint, the way that the paint is applied. You can see this cadmium and Indian yellow combination at the top is very flat, very slippery, almost like ice, skidded across the top. The eye moves very freely and quickly in that passage. And then as you move down, the paint gets a little more gestural, a little more fingery, and more, you have to commit yourself a little bit more in this area. And then a place like this, where the paint is whipped and folded and more gestural, thinking in terms of Philip Guston or even Chardin, the idea of something becoming something else, not set, the idea of transformation. And then that, I think, is in contrast to something like this orange area in the background, which again is much flatter, much more spatial. So almost there's a feeling of compression here and then release over there. I know all this sounds very salacious, and that's because it is. And then you move into these tree-like forms, which sort of demarcate the foreground and create depth of space. And I've talked about the notion of speed in a mark before, and if you follow this one up here, it's broken, it's denuded, the eye moves sort of slow and labored through that. Then you hit this dark umber and black, and it zips very quickly up into that upper passage. So again, I'm trying to affect or at least influence the speed at which the eye reads certain passages in the painting.